Welcome to the Tenet Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson, here with my friend, my partner, known to many as quite possibly the most interesting man in the world, South Dakota's favorite son, Wes Brown.
Oh, we're back to that.
Yeah, man. Why not?
I get mail every time you say that. Like, I don't think he's our favorite son, but I'll take it.
I want to have something in South Dakota that's named after you. So
Maybe I should.
I figure eventually somebody will go, you know what? Maybe we should do something special for Wes Brown.
Let's buy a billboard. So when people are going to Wall Drug, they'll see my face.
That would be great. Maybe we should buy a billboard, some space on a billboard as people are driving to Wall Drug. We'll take one of those billboards away from Wall and have your face. Listen to the Tenet Podcast. There's nothing going on out there anyway. I mean,
and they got plenty of things
like
to listen
two country stations and right. They could be listening to Tenet Podcast, right?
It's not as bad as Wyoming, but almost.
Actually,
it's good to see you, buddy.
It's good to see you too. I love that drive, actually.
Yeah, it's a good drive.
Really beautiful.
I'm excited for today. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I'm very excited for today. And before we get into it, I want to remind everyone to come experience the exhibit that Tenet is putting together in partnership with Valkyrie Gallery, happening January 19th through the 30th. Valkyrie Gallery and Tenet present Other Voices, Other Rooms, featuring the work of 3 extraordinary artists, all of which have been on Tenet: Anna Kay, Brenda Stumpf, and Megan Wilbar. Opening reception will be Saturday, January 22nd from 5 to 8:30 p.m. And Valkyrie Gallery is in the Belmar shopping area, 445 South Salisbury Street in Lakewood. Look for all the details on our social media and on our website, tenetpodcast.com. All right, ready to talk some art?
Let's do it.
We are excited and honored to talk with our next guest. His current work focuses on addiction and stigma with its victims, witnesses, and survivors, and is exhibited internationally at universities, museums, and galleries. His work is both exquisite and haunting and absolutely mesmerizing. Welcome to the program, William Stoehr. How are you?
I'm quite well. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you, and we're so excited that you're willing to take time out of your Saturday to speak with us for a while. So thank you. Before we get into it, I want to direct our listeners to your website and Instagram. William's website is williamstoehrart.com, and Stoehr is spelled Stoehr. And you can find him on Instagram at WL Stoehr. As we get started here, we've talked to a lot of artists doing this podcast, and one of the takeaways is that everyone does this art thing differently, and you're no exception. Everyone has their own path to explore, and you have had a whole other life or lives before you even pivoted to becoming a full-time artist and pursuing your passion, correct?
That is correct. Right.
You were born and raised in Burlington, Wisconsin?
Correct. Yep.
Oldest of 5 kids?
Yes.
What was life like for you as a young man?
Well, as a kid, I played baseball every day. I fished every day. I rode my bike. And I think I was a pretty just happy-go-lucky kid.
And what's Burlington, Wisconsin like? Is it like a pretty rural area?
Yes. When I grew up there, I believe there were about 5,000 people in the town, and it was a regional center for the local farms. And so it had the banking and the schools and the hospital for the farming community that surrounded it. And it's about, I would guess 35 miles from Milwaukee. It's southwest of Milwaukee. And it was a small town. And so I grew up in a small town, and I went to a Catholic school there, and I think I really enjoyed my childhood and into my teenage years.
Pretty close family?
Well, I was the oldest, and The next in line, my sister was 3 years younger. And I don't think I hung out with my siblings really that much. And I think I was just a little bit older. I was a boy. I was kind of busy with my own things. But since then, we've become close. And the whole family is in contact on our, we've had a family website that we all contribute to and share pictures. And so that's really helped. But I also moved away from Burlington right after high school when I went to college and then started my career. And so I was a distance away. And so when I would come back, I think all of our family members would say that they're always surprised how we get along so well and pull together whenever there's a crisis we need to address and just have a good time together. So it's been great.
Are you and your siblings, are you pretty different from each other?
For the most part, I would say yes. And, as we sit down and talk, sometimes we talk about that, how different we are. And sometimes we say, did we grow up in the same house? And yes, I would say there's a great deal of a difference, even though we all appreciate what each other does. We've all taken very different career paths.
Yeah, I'm always curious about how large families, like the dynamics and how different people can be as far as how they evolve, even though they come from the same environment, same parents or what have you, just how people are on their own separate paths.
Mm-hmm. Right.
When you were a child, you had an interest in art, but it wasn't something that you ended up pursuing, at least early on.
Right.
Why was that?
Well, when I was in high school, I was convinced that I wanted to be a fine artist. And my high school teacher, now understand this is in the 60s. And so abstract expressionism, while it wasn't a new thing, was kind of in its heyday. And I remember my freshman year in high school, my art teacher exposing me to Jackson Pollock and Franz Klein and Willem de Kooning, who became my favorite. And I was convinced that I wanted to be a fine artist. Now, when I started talking to my high school counselor, and brought my parents into this as to what would be a next stage, the notion of me throwing paint and spilling paint and making a career of that wasn't real high on their radar. And I remember sitting down across from the counselor and him suggesting that I go spend some time with the illustrator at our local weekly newspaper and learn how to be a commercial artist. And here they were thinking advertisements for the local paper, for the local dress shop. And I was thinking Willem de Kooning. And so there was a disconnect there. And, I was the first one in our family to be thinking about college. And I don't think any of us really knew how to pursue it. And one thing led to another, and art school was expensive. So one of my high school teachers suggested, he said, are you thinking about college? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, why don't you go where I went? And it was a little college in northern Wisconsin called Stout. And so, at pretty late in the year, I sent away my application. And I'm guessing they took probably 100% of people that applied. And I got in. And one thing I remember is tuition was $150. And so it was great. And so, I went to northern Wisconsin at this small college, didn't do anything with art. And I came out with to become an industrial engineer. And my whole life changed then, really, as I set art aside and I didn't even think about it. And I would do a drawing maybe occasionally, but really not. And for the first time in my life, I got involved in athletics. And so I hadn't competed in any varsity sports in high school. And then I became captain of 2 varsity sports in college. And so my whole life just took off in a different direction. And I went to work for a big industrial company, a General Electric company. And then I went to work for one of their competitors a little later. And I became a factory manager by the time I was 30. And I decided that, this wasn't the life that I wanted. And so my wife and I decided that we were going to move west. And we'd been traveling in the Rocky Mountains and for a bunch of reasons, lifestyle, allergies, the mountains, skiing, there's all of this. We said, we're going to live here someday. And so we started the process to move out to Colorado. And so we put our house on the market and we said, the first one of us that gets a job, that's where we were going to go. And we picked out 3 places that we would want to live if one of us got a job there. And they were Bozeman, Montana, someplace west of Denver, and someplace east of Salt Lake City. And I got the first job, and it was in the Denver area. So we packed up our 6-year-old son and all of our belongings, put our house on the market, moved to Colorado, and never looked back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So art wasn't even really a thought once you decided to go to college. It was, you just chose this career path of being an engineer.
Right, exactly.
Just because there wasn't really anybody everybody was being pragmatic, right? Like they thought that fine art probably wasn't a viable career choice, I imagine.
Right. And also, this was the heat of the Vietnam War going on. And so if I didn't go to college, I'd be drafted. If I didn't have a career that was considered to be one that was of importance to the government, I'd be drafted. And so I'm sure that was in the back of my mind. And as I think about it now, I can't think of an actual discussion in that regard. But I certainly wasn't a fan of going to Vietnam. And so going to college kind of, I guess, bought me some time. And, as it turned out, I was a medical deferment. But, being an artist, I probably would have been drafted. And not in college, I would have been drafted. And so, that was in the back of everybody's mind during that time period. And so I just also probably didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I knew I could probably do something else. So I just charged off in this direction. And I hung on to that for a lot of years, ultimately culminating with going to work for National Geographic. And just prior to that, 10 years prior, I had an accident skiing, a bad accident, spring skiing at Copper Mountain, t-shirt weather, and I ended up with a spiral tib-fib fracture. And I was in a cast for a long period of time. And during this process, my wife and I decided to get mountain bikes. This was in 1983. Nobody was mountain biking then. And we ended up writing 2 mountain bike guides to Colorado, which one became the local nonfiction bestseller. And that led us to having a mapping company called Trails Illustrated Maps. And then we sold, 10 years later, we sold Trails Illustrated to National Geographic. And then I became a director, and then a vice president, and then a president of the mapping group of National Geographic. And so also in this time, we moved to the Caribbean. So we moved to the Virgin Islands, and I was commuting up to Washington, D.C. and Colorado and San Francisco for business. And then at one point I said, this has been the greatest job I've ever had, but I'm 55 years old. I have more than enough time to start another career. So I quit the best job I ever had. I gave him actually 2 years notice, and to become an artist. And because that's what I wanted to be when I was 16. So I thought, why not give that a try? Well, and of course, my first paintings, which I still have, are pretty bad, and they're quite small. So if you're familiar with what I'm doing now, and so I was doing these little 12-inch paintings, and I pursued, and all of a sudden I had an art gallery get interested in some of the little bit later work 6 months later. And I kept working bigger and bigger. And I was doing what I imagined the abstract expressionists were doing in terms of how they were throwing paint and big strokes. And I was having a lot of fun with it. And the paintings started to sell. And I had a great gallery in the Virgin Islands, and then I got a gallery in Denver. And very quickly, I aligned with Space Gallery in Denver. Things were going really well. And then one day, I was talking to Michael Burnett, who's the owner and curator at Space Gallery. And I said, Michael, I'm getting kind of bored of what I'm doing. I don't seem to have any cohesive body of work. And I don't really have a mission with the direction I'm going. And he said, well, you really do faces well. Why don't you try some big faces? Well, I started doing big faces and I never looked back. And so I started doing 4-foot faces, and then 5-foot faces, and then 7-foot faces. And still, while I was fine-tuning the direction I was going with my methods and subject matter, I really didn't have a mission yet. And I was kind of, I was always looking for something. So I would say, I need to do something about this war that's happening over there, or I need to do something about immigration, or I need to do something about, and so I had a whole list of things that I was doing. And then my sister OD'd and died. And that was tragic. And so suddenly I said, this is what I'm going to dedicate my work to. This is my mission. My mission is going to be addiction. And my mission is going to be even specific in there, and it's going to deal with the stigma of addiction. Because the number one thing that has to happen for people to be able to conquer this is to get over the stigma, so that they are willing to get help, so that people are willing to help them. And so when they also go for help, that the people they go to understand the situation and treat it as a disease rather than a character flaw. So that's where I am now. And I've been doing this probably, for 10 years now, just focusing on stigma and addiction with my paintings.
Prior to your pursuing this whole idea of trying to overcome the stigma of addiction with your artwork, that work was you were still painting these large faces.
Yes.
How was that evolution? What was your thought behind that with these big faces? How were you trying to convey some of these other issues that you were seeing that you wanted to address prior to concentrating on the addiction side of things?
Sure. Okay. So a couple things happened. First of all, 10 years ago, I was invited to a symposium at Johns Hopkins. The invited guests included probably 400 people that were neuroscientists from around the world and psychologists and other people associated with this whole study of art, and the buzzword is neuroaesthetics. So what's happening in the visual brain when we observe or create work? And so I was invited to this, and it was just kind of a chance invitation in a way, because someone in that field had noticed my work and started to ask me questions about why I was doing certain things in my art, because they saw that I was moving people, and there was something in the art that was causing people to have an emotional reaction. And of course, one of the items was obviously the eyes. And so I had a lot of questions about why and how did I learn to do certain things? And, I hadn't really thought about it. And so when I would create an eye, and specifically one of the neuroscientists asked me, why is it that you use complementary colors of equal value in your eyes? And I said, well, I don't know. And they said, do you realize what goes on in the brain when you do that? And it turns out that artists like Monet had used this all the time in his paintings. And he probably hadn't thought about it in neurobiological terms, but he noticed that he could make poppies sway in a green field. And so he could make a sun disappear in an image. But if you created that image in black and white, if you took a black and white photo of it, but when you saw it in color, it shimmered. And so he had experimented and somehow found out how he could be using certain colors, probably not knowing or thinking too hard about the fact that the colors happen to be of the same value, and that just throws the brain into a tizzy, because we evaluate value and shading differently than we evaluate color. And we actually have two separate pathways to our brains for that information. And if you have equal value and complementary colors, it kind of shimmers. And you remember back op art when people would do these geometric paintings that would just shimmer? And that's what they were doing. And so this scientist asked me how I learned to do that. And I said, well, I put a color in an eye, and then I was looking at some work that another artist did where he said, when I'm in doubt, I always put green next to purple. So I tried that. And then I said, well, I've got green in there. Why don't I put its complement in red? And just by chance, I was putting in highlights that were yellow, which is the complement of purple. And they were a very similar value. And I just did it by accident. And so now I don't do it by accident. I put it in on purpose. And so, that got the discussion with a neuroscientist. And suddenly I'm invited to be on a panel at a huge symposium at Johns Hopkins. And then this just took off. So then I had other conversations with multiple neurobiologists who I've kept in touch with. I've visited one of them 3 different times in London now. And we carry on a discussion. And out of that came the most important thing for me, and that is the notion of ambiguity. And can I create an ambiguity in a painting such that you, the viewer, create the narrative for it? And can I in some way direct that narrative to more closely resemble my mission? And so that's what I'm always working on. If you look at my paintings, I don't have any context. There's never a background. And it's always a blank color. And so I don't give you any idea of what's really going on. And in some, I really don't give you an expression. Some I do. I'll lead it a little bit. Frequently, I'll put one expression on one side of the face and a different one on the other. And if I hadn't told you that, you wouldn't notice it. But if you go and block it out, you'll see it. And I think this set of circumstances that I set up in the painting causes you to react to it in different ways based on how you feel. And so you fill in the blanks, you create the narrative for the painting. And frequently, someone who is dealing with a past history in their life, a history of addiction, or if they have a family member that they've been dealing with that's had an addiction, responds to that. Earlier, when I was doing it, people were responding for all kinds of reasons. And that was fine. But I decided to focus it a little bit more. And really the way I can focus it is by what's my title for the show. So the latest show was Stigma and Survival. And so that immediately focuses it. If I didn't have anything but, say, victims, witnesses, and survivors for the title, or if I just had new works by William Stoehr, people would still come in and react strongly, but they would react over a whole host of things. But what I do now, by focusing it, I also then include with the shows panel discussions, literature, all these things that revolve around the issues of addiction and stigma. I've been collaborating with the National Institute of Health for their National Institute on Drug Abuse. And so when I involve them in the program, I may have a video that they're involved in. And so everything then starts to focus. So, the focus is to stigma and survival is kind of outside of what I paint, or it incorporates what I paint, but that's how I'm actually focusing it in that direction.
I think that's wonderful that you're giving it context. You're still leaving it up to the viewer to provide their own narrative to what's going on. But at the same time, and we've had multiple discussions about this in previous episodes, but how important that conversation and what art can do with that conversation. So I think it's wonderful that you're bringing, educating people, making people think about and talk about this issue of addiction and the stigma that it carries.
Right.
Before I read about some of these pieces and you talking about it in some of these articles, I didn't realize that there was 2 different expressions going on, but what I was in tune to as a photographer is because these eyes in the subjects, these large faces that you're painting, are very compelling. I mean, they really draw you in. But as a photographer, I'm always looking at people's eyes, and especially in photographs, because I'm curious about how a photograph was lit. A way to assess that is look at the catch lights in a person's eyes, right? So I'm looking at your paintings and going, this is really interesting. I mean, like I said, the eyes are really compelling, but I'm looking at the catch lights, and yeah, depending on where the light source is, you can get different catch lights, but you still kind of have a sense. But in some of these, the catch lights are very different. And so there is this unconscious thing that's going on in your brain, or it was in my brain, where I was reading different, and when you spend time with a piece, you kind of, you start to see different things. But it really was like, what is going on here? Like, these eyes are like perfect and they really draw me in, but like the left eye has different catch lights than the right eye, and not assessing the rest of the painting itself. So it's interesting. I'm glad you spoke to that.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I have a couple of good friends that are photographers, and one of them will say to me, I like this painting, but the shadows are all wrong. And what I told him was, first, there's the part about the different expressions, but also I said, the shadows meet the needs of the composition. And then, so I'm not looking to make an image that's real, but I am looking to have you have a real experience looking at the painting. So in other words, the reality is not in the painting. The reality is in what you create, not only the narrative, but how you finish the painting in your own mind. And what I've discovered is, and my neurobiologist friends have confirmed this, I can draw some lips that are just flesh colored, let's say, or black and white. And I can put a spot of red alongside the cheek. And then I can ask you later, what color are the lips? And you would say red. And so I learned very early that the color doesn't need to be contained in the line, but the color needs to be there. And I mean, close. I don't mean I put it way out in left field. But so little things like that then cause you to complete the painting. And so that's a critical element of what I do. Is it's very rare that I paint a painting that is, let's say, a complete portrait. I have a lot of abstract features in there. And I put in some little cues, and I cause you to not only complete the painting physically in your mind, and you will do a better job completing that painting than I can. You'll do it with your own perfect mental image, and then you'll remember it. But then you do the narrative. And so you do the complete package. And once that happens, it becomes a better painting for you. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to trigger you to complete the painting and then trigger you to complete the narrative. And that's a reality that is greater than just simply looking at the image itself.
So interesting. And so what started as something that was really what you were doing was it was all intuitive. As you've learned more about neuroscience and talked with these scientists, now you're incorporating some of these ideas and it's more intentional. Is that understanding?
Yeah, it's intentional, but it's also second nature now. I don't even think about it. Yeah. And so when I'm putting the color in the eye, or I'm putting in the highlights, or putting on two sides of the face, and sometimes that just happens by accident. My whole process used to be, it's a little different now, but up until COVID, my whole process started with pouring paint on a canvas, and I would just let it flow. And out of that, so here's how I started painting. I would start a 7-foot canvas, and I would put in 2 X's where the eyes are. I put a triangle where the nose is, and I put a line where the mouth is. And I do that for 2 reasons. One, when I'm pouring paint, I guide it a little bit, but also all of my paintings in general have their eyes in the same place. And so when I put them in a gallery, in a show, they really hang well, and they hang together. And it looks like a group of people, rather than, here's one in landscape mode, here's one in portrait mode, here's one that's bigger, here's one that's smaller. No, they hang together as a group. And one of the things I learned very early is my actual canvas is the gallery wall. And so I paint my work so that it shows together. And I also learned that when I put two pieces together and I put in a different piece or a third piece, it changes. And the metaphor I like to use is, it's just like a group or a clique or a gang or a bunch of friends, that one person joins the group and they change the group. And that person is also changed by the group. And so I have fun with that metaphor when I'm hanging a show, and hanging them, not just that they hang color-wise or composition-wise, but that they hang somehow in a way that feels like real people hanging. So anyhow, so that's why I put in the X's for the eyes and for the nose and the mouth. And they're generally in the same relative place on a canvas, whether it's a 4-foot canvas, a 6-foot canvas, or a 7-foot canvas. So then I start pouring paint. So I'll lay it down on the floor and I'll start pouring paint on it and I'll watch it flow. And actually, I don't do it on the floor anymore. I have an easel that folds into a table because it's hard working on the floor. It's hard on your back. But so I've got it at kind of a table height, and I'll pour the paint and I'll watch it go. And sometimes I don't care where it goes. Sometimes I'll take the canvas and I'll tilt it and I'll guide it. Sometimes I'll blot some of it up. But in general, I let it go. And then I say, now what can I make of this? Well, I already know where the eyes are going to be. I already know where the nose and the lips are going to be. So then I start refining it until I get the image that you see up on my website or in a show. And so that was the original process of pouring paint. And I started doing that really early on, pouring paint. And so that's one of the characteristics you'll see in my paintings. Now, they aren't all poured paint, but many of them are. Most of them are. They start out that way. And then I just start adding layers and layers and layers and layers of poured paint and marks. And I start to give a depth to the painting. And between every layer, I put down varnish. And I used to spray it, but that just environmentally, and it was jamming up my nose. And even if I wear a mask, it was bothering me. And I have to take it outside to do it. And so then I started brushing on clear varnish, and it dries. It's acrylic based. It dries, in 10 minutes. And so after every layer, I would put on, I still do, a coat of varnish. And all of a sudden, I might have 20 coats on there. And so now I'm doing really what the oil painters do in terms of layering the thin layers of oil. And so I start to get on a lot of the paintings, particularly ones I worked on for a long time, a real depth to it. And so what I want people to do is I want people to not only go up close to the painting, where they'll see all these little marks and this depth and these little color variations that are going on, but I want them to then step back and see, in some cases, some of my paintings almost look photoreal when you get back from them. And so this combination of multiple painting, so that's what Chuck Close did for years. And he did it with little symbols, and I'm doing it with paint splatters and little marks that I put on. And sometimes they're little dots with the tiniest brush. And then other times I'll brush on a very watered down paint with a very wide brush. And the paint acts like water on a freshly waxed car, where you get the little water spots, and sometimes I'll get those spots. And so I've learned this over the years, what techniques work and which techniques don't work. And, it's just the process that I've started working with. Now, however, because of COVID, I've gone digital. And so all the while that I was creating the paintings that I just described, during the process, if I remember, I'm taking pictures every day at the end of it. And for some paintings, I've really got a great grouping of very early versions of a painting. And so I'm taking those now and I'm completing them digitally. And I'm loving doing this. And I don't have the brushes in my hand, which I love. And I love the big movements in the 7-foot canvases. And so now I'm working with a monitor that is a 34-inch monitor and an iPad. And that's a lot different. But I'm really enjoying this process of rediscovering how I paint. And so I'm taking these very early acrylic paintings and I'm working on them digitally. And so they still look like my acrylic paintings, but I'm doing other things that I wouldn't be able to do with paint that I can do digitally. And I don't use what I will call digital paint programs. Like I don't say, gee, I want to paint like I'm painting in watercolor or something like that. And I don't use the little trick tools that they have in there. And I mean, I think I shouldn't even call it that, because I think it's great that artists are learning how to use that. But I'm trying to do something that's more organic with what I'm already doing. And so I'm picking up little pieces of image and stretching it and moving it around and creating different kinds of lines digitally. And I'm doing things with light that I couldn't do with my acrylic paints. And so now suddenly I've got about 30 of these new digital paintings that I've done in the last year. And I've printed some out that, frankly, they look better than the original painting in some cases, not all. But then when you see them on a big monitor, so I just bought are you familiar with frame TVs?
No, I don't think
so.
so.
Okay. Samsung has a line of something they call frame TVs, and they just announced their 85-inch frame TV. Now, if you can imagine a very, very high definition television that is flat to the wall, is only an inch thick. It looks just like a picture frame. And the only thing coming out of it is a tiny wire about the size of a computer power cable that goes down to a box that you hide into a cabinet or someplace else that has all the TV and electronics in it. So all they've got is essentially the screen on the wall. My new paintings on those screens look spectacular. Actually, I shouldn't say that, but I'm the judge right now because I'm doing it. And I'm a harsh judge of my own work, mind you, but I'm real pleased with the results. That's the future. And that's going to be one of the futures. And so think about people putting an 85-inch TV screen in their home that has a succession of paintings, that each day a different painting comes up on the screen. Now, they can still use it as a TV, but I think you're going to see, if you turn around and look at your back wall, someday that still life is going to be a screen TV. And they're not that expensive. And I think it's a great thing. So I'm still going to continue to paint on canvas, but I've got this whole new thing that I'm working with that also allows me to put up art videos and all kinds of things that I think are going to be a real wave. And if you look at how Samsung is promoting this, what you do is you buy the frame TV, you buy this 85-inch, they got all sizes. And you can put some of them in portrait mode as well as, in landscape mode. And they're selling artists' work to be shown on these. And they look quite spectacular. And of course, now what's happening is artists will start painting for the TV as opposed to the canvas. And so I'm having fun just exploring this. And so that's been a whole new avenue for me. So it's just one other thing that opened up a new thing that I can work with. So I love experimenting with my paint, all right? I pour paint, I try new techniques. I hit my canvases with a garden hose. I use a power washer on them sometimes. I do all these things to get effects, which I then hone, mine, and learn from. It's just like science, right? So what does a scientist do? He has a hypothesis, he runs the experiment, and then he evaluates it. It's the same thing I do. I say, what will happen if I use the garden hose on this? And then I evaluate what it is, and I discard it and say, well, that was a dumb idea. Or I say, well, that really worked out good. I think I'll use it on another painting. And so now what's happened from not just experimenting with my tools, which include, my biggest tools are Bounty paper towels, a squeegee, and of course my brushes. Oh, and sandpaper and a kitchen scrubby. That's what I use on my paintings. And so now I've got the iMovie to play with. I've got all kinds of stuff on my iPad that I'm using. I'm now using a GarageBand to add sound to some things. So now my experimenting, there's not enough time in the day. I mean, if I'm going to spend time with my grandkids and do all the other things I need to do, my wife and I, now that we're in DC, are doing all these museum visits, get that in, and then try to fit in all these new ideas. Oh man, I'm not young enough to fit all this in.
you say you're not young enough, but I mean, your whole thought process is very young in thought and, embracing technology, which a lot of people, would drag their feet doing. I think that's pretty cool that you're doing this hybrid painting, so to speak, where you're incorporating the traditional and, the new technology, the digital, and making new creations out of it, and thinking about, how people are going to interact with art in the future, and how you can change that narrative, still have a narrative that you're presenting to people and letting them experience it in a whole different way.
Yes. And here's the most important part of it. It's a new group of people that are doing this. It's more people to reach with my message. So what's the goal of my painting? It is to move people to take some action and to reach as many people as possible. That's what I'm trying to do. And that's what the technology is allowing me to do. When COVID hit, and I had three art shows canceled that first year. Two of which have happened again, one at the University of Colorado and the other at the Foothills Art Center. Then there was another one in Kuwait that was canceled, and it's been postponed, and I'm not sure what'll happen. But I sat back and said, I don't have a venue for my work. But I have more than 300,000 followers on social media. So I need to focus on that. And so one thing was to put up my existing paintings and to talk about them. But the next thing was to put up something entirely new that reached a greater population of people. And that's where the digital work quickly came into play. The other critical element was, I've got a big studio back in Boulder, Colorado. I don't have a studio here in my apartment in Washington, D.C. And so suddenly my desk became my studio. So I've got my frame TV on the wall right here. I've got my big monitor here. I've got my computer here. And I've got my iPad in my lap. And that's my studio now. And so that pushed me, obviously, in a digital direction. So this combination of COVID, my trying to reach a wider audience, and my shows being canceled, combined with my mission, boom, it just made perfect sense for me to take this digital direction.
Yeah, it came out of almost like necessity in a sense.
Yes, that's exactly right.
What programs are you using on the iPad that just for people to kind of wrap their heads around when you take your original image, and then what are you using to manipulate that? Yes.
Okay. First of all, I'm using Photoshop Elements. And the reason I use Photoshop Elements is it gives me everything that I want to do as an artist, not necessarily a photographer, but as an artist. And it's not too complex. And so I have Photoshop Elements running on my iPad, and then I have it running on my computer. And one of the things I learned is I like the computer version better than the iPad version. So what I do then is I use my iPad as a second monitor for my computer. So what's on my monitor is on my iPad, and it's fast. It works just great. Then what I do is I have a third pro monitor. It's called BenQ. Mm-hmm. is the brand. And I've got that set up in portrait mode sitting over here. And then I've got the TV over here so that I can see, because all four of these devices show the images differently. The colors are slightly different. The resolution appears differently, even though it isn't, but I've sized them to 4K size. So 4K on a big monitor is different than 4K on a smaller monitor in terms of how tight it is. And so that's my work setup. And then for programming, in addition to my Photoshop, I use iMovie a lot, and I use Keynote a lot to create GIFs. And so I'll have some paintings that'll just change a little bit. And if I have a lot of change, I'll take it into iMovie, and I'll create sometimes a 7-8 minute movie of work. But even for short pieces, frequently I'll put it on iMovie, and then people can watch it as a little video clip. But then on my iPad, and my friends at Adobe just changed my program, so I'll tell you what the new one is. And I just changed this a day ago. So all of the last few years, I have been working with Adobe Sketch. And I've been doing mainly line work and color work and overlay. So for instance, I can bring in an image out of Photoshop, a Photoshop file, and I can start to add different layers on it in Adobe Sketch. And I can also draw on that. Well, I can also draw on Photoshop, but I like doing it on Adobe Sketch because I like the lines I'm getting. And it could be that I just don't know how to do it properly on the others, but I use an Apple Pencil, of course. And then I've got the 12-inch iPad that I'm using. But now Adobe's dropping the Sketch program, and they're now going to something called Fresco, which I haven't used yet. And so just yesterday, I imported all my Sketch files, Adobe Sketch, into Adobe Fresco. But, Adobe Sketch, Adobe Fresco, Adobe Photoshop I'm using. Both that's on my iPad. I use Photoshop Elements on my computer, and then iMovie and GarageBand. So that's what I'm working with. And that's not to say there aren't better programs out there, but I'm comfortable with what I'm doing, and I have a workflow that seems to work for me. So I've been sticking with that, and I'm happy with the results, and I'm still able to experiment and try new things. With Photoshop or even Photoshop Elements, it's just a fraction of the stuff I know about and use. And every so often I'll say, well, what happens if I use this tool? And so, or every so often I'll set aside a day and I'll say, now I'm going to start playing with the sponge tool. Well, I really like it now, and so there's just little things that I'm learning how to do.
So do you start with an original acrylic paint and then manipulate it to create this digital piece, or have you created any from scratch, or just digital, I should say?
Yes, I have actually. But I'll tell you, 90% of them, I'm starting with actual paintings that I have in process, or sometimes it'll be one that's been kind of completed. I mean, the way I look at it, a painting's never complete, because I look at it an hour later or a year later, and I say, oh man, I shouldn't have done that, or I wish I would have done this. Well, now I do it. And but having these in-process works has really been fun to take a painting, which I thought was a good painting when I first finished it, or a dog, one or the other, and I take it in a totally new direction. And what I haven't done yet is do multiple ones, just because I've got all this big inventory of ones that have been partially done that I'm still playing with and trying to create these series of works. And, I'm painting them to, and to answer your question, I do have some that are totally digital. And, I like those too. But one of the things I like about the hybrid is I don't know anybody else doing that. And it kind of is a signature for me now. And there's a lot of people doing just pure digital work, and a lot of people really doing good work. And that's a whole group of people that at this point, I'm wanting to do my own thing. And I've got something now that's signature for me. And so that's why I'm kind of sticking with that right now. Now, that being said, pre-COVID, I had 2 drawing groups. And I drew with a group of, at any one time, 12 or 13 artists. We're all great friends in Longmont. It was a life drawing group, always same people, same day, same time. And I did that for years. And then I hosted 3 other artists with me in my studio on Wednesday evenings. And of course, we're not doing that anymore either. In each case, we had a live model. Most of my work was done on my iPad. And so I was creating original digital work on my iPad, that some of which I will take, I will flesh out and create more work with that. When I first started working with my iPad, what I said was, I don't want to use the paintings that I can do, like a oil painting or a charcoal painting. I just want to deal with lines. So I did a whole series. I must have 100 or more of these that I hung on to, that I said, can I create a line such that it feels like the person, but doesn't look like the person? Can I make that person feel like they're dancing, even though it's just a still line? And so I really focused on that, just drawing quick lines and creating an image that moved and felt different and wasn't native really to the drawing programs. It was something just new. And I really got started I've been working with my iPad for probably 10 years now. And I got motivated to do this by following David Hockney. So I'm a big fan of David Hockney. I love the way he thinks. And same thing with Picasso. I love the way he thought. And so a very early adopter of digital technology was Hockney. And so I went to his big show at the Royal Academy in London, it might have been 10 years ago. And I looked at the large pieces he was producing from his iPad and iPhone. And he was blowing them up, and he was putting them into a matrix, and like a puzzle he was putting together. And he would have these massive pieces that were put together with 48-inch prints of his iPad drawings. And I said, man, if David Hockney can do it, I can do this, And so I'm taking a little different direction. But he is such an innovator, in the way he thinks. And so I've been following what he's been doing with his iPad. And so I started using the program he was using back then. It was called Brushes. So that's how I started. And I don't use Brushes anymore. I've folded everything basically into the Adobe community of products. But he's the guy that got me really started on my iPad. And I've just continued with that thing.
So the current workflow that you have now, that's been an evolution of essentially 10 years, starting with the iPad and then just incorporating different elements to it.
Yes, absolutely.
And I saw that you'd mentioned NFTs in some of these interviews that you've done. Are you
Yes.
selling? Have you deep dived into the world of NFTs?
Yes and no. So about maybe 5-6 months ago, I created one NFT to just see what it was about. And it didn't sell. I didn't follow up on it. And it was kind of too complex for me. But now I've been really deep diving into it. And I can't say anything yet because it hasn't been released yet. I've been asking, well, can I contact someone else who's doing this, whatever? And they're saying, no, it hasn't been released yet. But I think the NFT world is really going to happen. And it is happening, okay? But I think for what I'll call more curated art, more fine art, and there's NFT locations out there that are curated sites. Let's see, you can just do a search and see who's curating. And by that, I mean, there's some like Ocean Seas that really has a lot of things on it. And it's broad, and it allows a lot of people to get up and experiment and put their work up there. But now there's some sites that are highly curated, and they'll have a small selection of artists. And that's what I want to do. I want to get into something where my pieces will be promoted by the platform, that there'll be other artists with similar work, that these sites will have a following specific to that style of art. And so that's what I'm interested in now. And so actually for the last couple of weeks, I've been really involved in this, about imagining how else I can take my work. And so I've been formatting it for the screen. Okay, so it's formatted at 4K. And so it's the width and the height pixels that fit exactly on a 4K television screen. So now I'm looking at other things that I can suddenly do. Now suddenly, if someone's going to buy an image of mine for a 4K screen, remember when I said I take pictures of the image of the painting as I produced it? So we've all gone to museum exhibits where they say, well, here are the X-rays of some painting that Vermeer did. And they'll show maybe 10 layers showing how he thought about that painting, how it evolved, what the materials possibly he was using. And so they'll have this big display showing all that. Well, now in an NFT, I can give someone the picture, and then I can give them maybe 10 images of how it was created that just superimpose over the same image. So they can have the image up, or they can click and then have a little slideshow that says, here's the painting after 1 day, here's after 1 week, here it is after a month. And I can start to do things like that I can't do with a regular painting. I can start to do little shows of, you remember all my paintings, how I had the eyes lining up? So now it's something I can have multiple paintings morphing into each other seamlessly because they're the same size and the eyes are lining up. And that gives me something that is kind of exciting to do. For NFTs, I can offer someone one image that fits on a TV that's in the portrait mode, so it's long and skinny, or I can reformat that square. And I can offer prints. I can do, a series of 10 or 100 if I really want something to be in wide circulation, or I can sell it as an individual piece of work. I get lots of people who ask me, do you sell prints? And I say no. And the reason is I don't have the time to do that. I just don't want to mess with it. And I want to control it myself as much as I can. And so I just don't want to do that. But so typically when someone asks me for a print, I send them a JPEG and I say, do with it what you want. And it's not big enough JPEG that they can make a big print and try to sell it, but they can put it on their computer screen, or they can print out an 8x10 and frame it if they want. And I'm happy to do that. And so I can see doing that with an NFT, of maybe putting out a whole series that is an unlimited edition and put them out there for $10, so people can have the painting and get it in their hands. Then if you're a serious collector and you want to spend more, well, then I can sell you maybe one of 10 or just a one of one. And so I like that. And so there's still, this is not going to displace the market for stretched canvas paintings. And I'm still going to show those and paint those. But this is just one additional thing that just opens up a whole new world. Here's the other thing that is going to happen. And so the other day I was in a museum here in DC and they had some goggles to wear. So, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, oh man, pretty soon we're going to have avatars and I'm going to set up an art gallery or space gallery or someone like that's going to set up a digital art gallery, and that you can buy an avatar or have an avatar and walk into the gallery and see my paintings on the wall. And you can say, I'd like that one, but I'd like the original canvas. Or, you know what, I would like just a print of that one. Or I would like the original NFT. And you've got all those choices. And that's not going to be for everyone, but it's going to be for more and more people. And so it's like this Second Life gallery. It's going to be out there. And it's not that far. I know it's not that far away. And I fully intend to have my work in that kind of a space. And it's going to happen. It's just going to open up. It's going to open up so many avenues. And if you stop thinking about what it's like to look at a painting on a wall, and you think instead of what can I do with art? If I just have a clean slate and I can just do all these interesting things, that's the way you've got to start thinking about this. And I'm hoping to take the paint on canvas, and combine it with this new, and just take this in another direction and have fun with it.
That's amazing.
So interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the fact that you're thinking, incorporating this new technology and where art is going, because I think a lot of artists, they start out in they're like doing acrylics and they never break out of that mode. It's amazing that you're looking at what's the next step I can do. And the fact that you pivoted to doing work on an iPad, even though 10 years ago in a life drawing class, that's amazing.
Well, and also the people that want to just do the acrylics or the oils or the watercolors, that's wonderful, and that's, their hands feel good being in the paint, and it's great. And I love that too. But if I'm going to reach a bigger audience, I'm going to do this. And the other thing is it's fun. So as much fun as I have with my brush going across the canvas or pulling a squeegee across it, I'm having just as much fun playing with things on my iPad and then dreaming about where I can take this as a next stage. See, okay, so the next thing I truly think that there's going to be, okay, so the first thing when you think of NFTs and you sell a non-fungible token on a platform, a web-based platform, and you think, well, I'm cutting out the gallery. And then the galleries say, oh, we don't like this. These guys are cutting us out. No. The galleries need to get into that business. So, okay, so people buy art many ways. Some people like to go into a gallery. They like to know the gallery owner. They trust him or her. They bought multiple pieces from that person. And so they go in and they say, what's good? Why should I buy this piece over this one? Can you give me some advice? Having a digital gallery, and I don't mean just a website with images that come up. I mean having avatars, and this person comes in and talks to your avatar, and they say, so Walt, what do you think of this artist's work? And do you think this is going to go anywhere? And do you think this will fit with the art I've already bought? They can have that discussion with a curated set of paintings in that person's gallery. So just think about that a minute. So pick any gallery in Denver, in Rapid City, and you say, not only do they have their typical paintings, they also have some of those big 85-inch screens I told you about with some paintings on. Plus, they've got their site where their clients can go up on and not only look at a selection of paintings, but walk into the gallery as well and have this same discussion with the gallery owner. So they make an appointment with the gallery owner, and the two avatars meet at 2 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, and they discuss this work. And they cut the deal there, and the work is guaranteed because it's an NFT. Right? So it's protected work. It's guaranteed. That's the same as a certificate of authenticity. That's what an NFT is. So the person gets a certificate of authenticity, NFT, for that digital piece. Seems like a no-brainer to me. Now I don't know if any galleries are doing that in Denver. There's probably galleries in San Francisco doing it. But that's going to be a wave of the future. And it's another opportunity. Just think, so here, a gallery owner now, most galleries are pressed for space, and their artists' paintings are in the back storeroom, right? And they're all stacked up in a row. And so then if someone says, well, I'm interested in this artist because I saw him on your website, but I see you don't have anything up on the wall, then the gallerist goes in the back and he pulls out a painting, and he maybe pulls out two more because that's all he's got of this artist. He's only got 3, 4 of them. And so now suddenly he's got access to a huge inventory with NFTs that he can sell. And he can still work on a commission basis with the artist. And it just makes so much sense. So now suddenly he may be working at a relatively small gallery, but now suddenly he's got access to a bunch of paintings that are immediately accessible to his clients coming in, or scheduling a meeting digitally. Well, anyhow, there's where I think it's going.
Yeah. You spent a lot of time exploring this and thinking about it, William. Have you had this conversation with, say, Michael Burnett down at Space Gallery?
Not yet. I have had a discussion with a platform that I'm working with as to will they be taking on galleries. And they said that they're already talking to some galleries to bring them in. So that's curated work onto their site, and they're already curating work. But what they said to me was, well, we trust you, bring us some names. And so the next thing I'm going to do is to talk to one of our galleries. And I haven't had a discussion yet, but I'm close to wanting to do that. And we'll see if who's out there that'll want to, pick something like this up. And, it's probably going to be a full-time job for someone, to be able to keep it up to date. So it's more involved than just them doing it. It's going to be a process and a learning process as well. And also a chance. While I think this is going to happen, and I don't have any doubt it's already happening. But the trick will be for a gallery to have enough artists that want to produce good NFTs. And if that means adding some artists, changing some out, I don't exactly know. But I will be having this discussion because I want to include my physical galleries in this process. I just don't want to be throwing my stuff out there. I want to include them in the process because they're selling my work.
Makes sense. And then have you explored, we've talked to a young artist and she's doing like some mind-blowing stuff. We haven't delved really far into the NFT thing, but she's incorporating this VR technology.
Oh, yes.
And XR technology where, you're actually experiencing the painting, you're going into her creations right. And having a whole other experience. Have you thought about that with your work at all?
Not yet, but I've played with it. And so I've put on a VR set and I've created a painting and then gone into it. And I have done that. And it's really fun. And that's a whole different experience. And here's the other thing that's going to happen is when VR technology becomes a contact lens, or at least Apple Glass or Google Glass, then things are really going to change, because people, not everyone is going to want to put on a VR headset, but people, just in everyday life can put on their VR glasses and then say, well, I've got kind of a pause here. So instead of going up and checking my Gmail, I think I'll just look at a couple of paintings. And so I think that kind of thing is going to happen. So I think the whole VR thing is going to happen. And I don't know of any artists who are producing that, but I know that artists are producing VR art. And I think that's another really exciting thing. And, it feels like sculpture, right? So you know what it's like to walk around a sculpture. And so I just thought of this. My I've got a couple all-time favorite sculptures, but one that I never fail to see because I've seen it in at least 6 locations is Rodin's Burghers of Calais. And I love that sculptural assemblage. And I've seen it in London, I've seen it in Paris, I've seen it in Brooklyn, and the list goes on. I've seen it in multiple places. And I always walk around it and I say, one of the great things about a great piece of sculpture, about any piece of sculpture, is that sculptor had to create that in 360 degrees. And so he had to create a composition where I create a composition that's 2D on the wall, there it is, and he creates something that has an infinite number of compositions. And so the best ones are just as good behind as they are in front, in my mind, the most interesting ones. And that's Burghers of Calais, fits that. So now once you do VR painting, aren't you doing that same thing? You're creating a painting that someone can walk around, can walk into, can see from multiple angles. And so as an artist, it's your responsibility to create an infinite number of compositions. I think that's a great concept.
New Magazine is our media sponsor for the Tenet podcast. That's NUE. You can follow both the national and the Denver edition of New Magazine on Instagram. The national edition can be found at new_magazine and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. Look to New for compelling stories from the world of art and fashion. Thanks for listening.
I'm William Stoehr, and you're listening to the Tenet podcast.
I want to go back to, you mentioned Picasso earlier, and how much of a fan you are of his work. And I guess that whole Cubism movement, right?
Right.
But I read somewhere that you would love to go back in time and be able to paint with him, not to really learn how he paints or the technique per se, but more about the conversation that you would have and how he thinks. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Okay. So actually, let me talk about Cubism in general for a moment. Okay. The early Cubists, mandolin on table with wine bottle, you wouldn't know what it was if that wasn't the title. And I really struggled with that. And I struggled with, it wasn't taking me anywhere. Now, I say that knowing full well that it changed art, and the historical significance is just mind-boggling. And the thought that went into that, we were looking at the early paintings that they were thinking about and trying to formulate. We were looking at their minds working, trying to put something together. So, they believed early on that color got in the way of how we perceive a painting, and at least the way they were thinking about it with Cubism. So anyhow, I looked at the early Cubist work and I said, I just don't know where that's going. I couldn't relate. So then when there's something that I'm not really a big fan of in art, but it's really important art or it's very popular, I say, well, why aren't I a fan? So for instance, I'm not a big fan of Renoir. And so one day I forced myself to just stay in the museum. And, they had 3 rooms of Renoirs. I just stayed there till I figured out what it is that I didn't understand. And I figured it out for me, what it was I came away with. And it was how he was using light and his dabbled light and how if you look at some of my stuff, I'm using light in the very same way. And I learned that from it. Well, I did the same thing with the Cubists and Picasso. And so what I started to do is I went up on the net and I started looking for everything I could find that was written either by them, although they didn't say a lot. Picasso, when a lot of things he said were tongue in cheek. But if you listen to what his friends were saying about him, or what the other Cubists were saying about the work that they were doing, whole new avenue opened up. And so in high school, I learned about Cubism and what I learned about it. It's just like there's these multiple planes and you're looking at something from different angles. And that was kind of the extent of it. But when I started reading about it, these guys were talking about creating an essential reality that was a greater reality than what the actual image was or what you actually saw. So in other words, could they create a painting that created a reality that was greater than just seeing a photograph of what it is that they were painting? And how were they trying to do that? Well, one of the reasons, and they talk all about the fourth dimension, and that's time. And they were saying, how can I bring time into a painting? Well, they brought time into the painting by having different planes. So if they did the face was on different planes. So an eye might be on one plane, a nose on a different plane, lips on a different plane. And I thought about that for a moment. And I incorporate a lot of that in my work. And I don't do it in the extreme that maybe they were doing, which I thought maybe was throwing some people off. But is by having these things in a separate plane, kind of creating a sense that you're maybe walking around a person when you're looking at them? Or does it create a sense of time? So then I started to think about how do we actually see, and this dovetailed with my thinking and my discussions with neuroscientists. And they say, well, the way we see an object is through a series, it's very abstract. So if I look at you, I don't see like a photograph of you. I take in all these little lines and such in shapes that are, I'm going to say highly pixelated, and I don't think that's the correct term, but I'm seeing a very abstract image of you, which I then combine with images of how a person is supposed to look, and then how you look. And so I pull all these out of my mind, and so then I incorporate that into this image of you that I create in my head. That's what they were trying to do. So they did things like they got rid of perspective. Okay, so perspective in a painting is fake. It's a trick, right? I mean, the tree in the background isn't really a real tiny tree. It's a real big tree. So they got rid of perspective. They got rid of shading, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, they got rid of shading because shading indicates a time of day. And so they got rid of those things and they focused on having these disjointed images, planes of, say, a face or a table or a still life. And then they combined it with cues that would cause you to have some mental image. So what's a good cue? They would maybe put in the label from a wine bottle, the actual label, and they'd collage it in. Or they would take a clipping from a newspaper or a headline, and they would collage it in. And so they were trying to trigger images. Now, Picasso moved off of Cubism, at least in terms of being an everyday thing, probably before he had all his ideas out there. I don't know. But there was so much going on there that as I delved into it, it just got me thinking about how can I trigger these emotions? So, Picasso, Guernica. For my money, Guernica is the greatest painting in the last 100 plus years. And when I saw Guernica for the first time, first of all, I went specifically to Madrid to see Guernica. And we obviously combined other things, but the focus of the trip was to see this painting. I couldn't bring myself to walk into the room. And then I waited till everyone left the room and I walked in and I just burst into tears. And one, I think it was just to be in the presence of a painting that's that great, but also to be in the presence of a painting that had such an effect on me. And so that just drove me to figure out, how did he do that? And so I look at that painting and I can analyze it in many ways. First of all, it's huge. It feels like you're stepping into a battlefield. So you've got that going on. He's got all these little tick marks that feel like a newspaper. And of course, the painting's in black and white and gray. And so it feels like a newspaper. So it feels like an important event. So he's triggering something in my mind or the people of the day that says, this was this tragic bombing of Guernica that was in the papers, and that triggered some memories. So he had that going on. And then he was mixing Cubism. Well, it's a Cubist painting, but he has all these things in there. He's got a howling woman, her head out of her window. He's got symbols in it all over the place, like a light bulb. And he's got his minotaur there, and he's got a dead horse, and he's got a pietà. He's got a woman with her dead child. He's got all of this stuff going on. So he's just bombarding you with all of these thoughts, and I think it just creates an emotional experience. And so I go, man, how did you even conceive of this? And so and he did it pretty quickly. And so I actually went to the place that he did the painting. I searched it, and it's not something you can easily find. And the reason I found it is he was, Balzac wrote a book called The Unknown Masterpiece. It's also alternately called The Hidden Masterpiece. Picasso had that book, and Cézanne kept the book on his bedstand. And that book, Balzac's book, was all about creating a reality that was greater than the image itself. It was that you, in your mind, creating the greatest reality. That's what Picasso was after. And that's what the Cubists were after. And of course, we didn't learn that in high school art. But for me, that just opened up a whole new avenue for thinking about art. And a lot of it ties right back into neuroscience. The neuroscientists say that Picasso was right. The Cubists were right. That's how we actually see. We get visual cues. We pull together all these little lines and shapes, and we combine that with our mental images, and we create the person that's in front of us. So I said, why can't I do that with the painting? Why can't I have you create the painting with your, you take my abstractions or my caricatures or my unfinished parts, you complete them, and then you complete the narrative. And then for you, that is a reality that's greater than the painting itself. And so Cubists and Picasso, the neuroscientists, takes me right to my philosophy on how I want to create art.
So I want to talk about this piece because of what we were just, the conversation we were just having, Destiny 24. This seems, most of what I see, this is a little bit different than a lot of the large face paintings that I see on your website. This is a little bit more along the lines of what we were just talking about, more literal, straightforward exploration. Talk about this painting.
Sure. Now, first of all, I can't remember exactly, but I think I did that original painting about, I'm going to say 6 years ago. In the last week, I've been fiddling with it digitally. And here's why. First of all, my other paintings that aren't as cubist as this one, you will still see a lot of the things we were talking about, but you have to look harder for it. And I sometimes think that having too much of this cubist abstraction technique is distracting. But this particular painting gets, I just posted it for the heck of it as an older painting on my Instagram page last week. Maybe it was the week before. And usually I'll get a couple hundred people will respond to something and say they like it, or they'll make a comment. In less than a week's time, this had about 8,000 people that responded to it. So I thought about it and wondered why that was. Now certainly we all know on social media that if certain people start following you and start reposting your stuff, that it certainly dramatically bumps up the following. But there was something about this piece. And so when I originally did this, I was taking a more extreme look at Cubism, more abstract look. But this was also fun to do. Now, one of the reasons I stopped doing paintings like this is that I had a high number of people saying, what's new here? This guy's just copying Picasso. I see this and all I see is Picasso. Well, I don't challenge anyone. And I say, if you can, other than for the concept of Cubism, if you can see any Picasso that even remotely looks like this, be my guest. But I kind of set this aside. But now I'm thinking, since this got such a great response, and since it was so much fun to do, how can I take a painting in this style and have it have the same emotional impact that some of my other paintings do that aren't as extreme as this is? You see some real obvious elements of Cubism here. And one, just take a look at the color. Remember when I talked about a lack of color? I'm obviously playing with that. The other thing to remember with paintings is that every painting is not the ultimate painting in my thinking at that time. They're all experiments. And so here I was experimenting with one thing. And this is a fun painting. The original painting is in Kuwait right now. What else can I tell you about it?
I was just curious about, and I think you just said it, that you were doing an exploration of what you could do in kind of more, what's the word I want to use? I'm lost for words.
Well, it's certainly more overt cubist.
Overt. That's the word I was searching for. Thank you, William. Mm-hmm. It was definitely more overt than what you see in your other work. The other work, it's much more subtle, but it's so well done. And to be honest with you, I hadn't really spent much time looking at this particular one. I had other pieces picked out that I wanted to talk about, but
sure.
After hearing that part of the conversation, I was like, this is really interesting. I want to explore this, and I wanted you to talk about it just a little bit. It's really well done, and I think it's really fresh. To me, I think it's a really modern take on Cubism and in your style. And as I'm sitting here, just kind of taking it in, I see more and more stuff starts to pop out at me, and
I know
it's starting to twist my mind a little bit. I'm like, oh God, I didn't see that just a second ago. And it's a really wonderful piece. And I love the fact that you're not just stuck in this particular style. It's not just these huge canvases with these faces. You're willing to explore and push yourself, and you're thinking about things. And I guess that's what I really appreciate. I appreciate that you're always questioning what's going on and thinking. Have you always been like that? Were you like that as a child? Were you engaged in that way, like just curious all the time?
Yeah, I think I took apart everything I was probably ever given.
Yeah, I just think it's really wonderful. And like I said, it was. So one of the things I did when I was looking at your website and looking at the different series of works, from these large faces to your self-portraits to the new work, the hybrid work, I would scroll, because it's laid out in a grid. I'd scroll, and I do what I do when I look at photography or photographs of my own, and I'm asking myself, does this work? How's the composition? But in that whole grid of looking at your pieces, I would just, I'd look at them and kind of see where my eye goes. Then I'd sit with my eyes closed, and I clean my visual palette for about a minute or so. And then I'd open them again and see what I was drawn to again. And using that as kind of a tool of like, what pieces really resonate with me, and not really having a lot of time to deep dive into it, but just thinking about, basic composition, color, the eyes that are such an important piece of all these creations of yours. And just kind of thinking about what it is that resonates with me. But this wasn't one of those pieces, but that's where that piece of, that's where that conversation and that connection comes in. Now we have this connection that we have going on because we're having dialogue and we're engaging. And once you engage with something, you can't go backwards. Like, now my eyes are open to what you were doing with this piece and your thought behind it, which is why I asked you about it.
Yeah. And of course, what you just described is the process of how we learn to like things. So if it's music, so you may not know, you may hear a song, you just let it go over your head. But once you start to learn about that particular artist and you learn about what they were trying to craft with that song, and even though you don't maybe understand music, you understand what some of their thinking was in putting together. Now suddenly you like that artist, or you have a greater appreciation. And I think that has a lot to do with how we respond, what we call beautiful, right? So that's such a fuzzy term, but yet in the scope of things, there's many people that would look at a lot of my paintings, which are kind of rough paintings. By rough, they're hard to look at for some people. They're paintings that maybe you wouldn't put above your dining room table. But I find people that do. and so frequently, either they're trying to make a statement or they kind of understand what I'm doing with this. And so they see a beauty beyond what we traditionally call beauty. So aesthetic beauty is much more than, how something appears subjectively to you. It has everything, I think, to do with just our appreciation for something.
Yeah. I'm probably one of those people that, if I could afford one of these large pieces, I would put it in my house in a second, because I like to make people stop. I like people to go, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
And, Wes, I mean, we've had a conversation before we even got on the podcast. Like, Wes really loves your work. He thinks it's beautiful. He's like, there's no way in hell I could have one of these in my house,
Primarily in my bedroom, because I'd have nightmares. they're dark, they're really dark. Yes. They are kind of rough to look at in a sense, but hearing the story behind it, and it definitely opens your eyes. It's like what Todd said. Once you open your eyes and hear the story behind what the mission of what you're doing, you can't go backwards. So it peels open the possibilities. But when I first looked at your stuff, I was like, man, I could not hang this stuff in my bedroom because I would have nightmares.
Well, there is a couple that bought one of my really hard paintings, and they put it in their front hall, and they have a front door that is all glass. And so when you drive by their house, they keep it lit at night, and you see this painting. And they told me that they've had people come up, knock on the door, and ask them to take down the painting.
Wow.
So I love it.
Yeah, I could totally see that, because it is striking, right? It's striking to look at. And that the scale that you're doing makes it more intimate. You really delve into it.
Isn't that an interesting word you just used? Because I use the same word. And that is, I feel that the large paintings are intimate in that they're somehow, in some cases, very hard to look at, but then there's an intimacy, and you can go up to it and you can own it. And the other thing I like is I want people to go 6 inches from the painting, and I want them to look at all the little stuff, and I want them to say, well, how did he do that? And I want them to come back the next day and see something totally different. And I want them to come back the next day and feel totally differently about the painting, as they have a different set of feelings that day that they put on the painting. And I know that happens because people tell me.
Well, your paintings definitely evoke emotion. There's no doubt about it. And I could definitely see where people would feel, one way, probably depending on their mood and what's going on in their life, but they'll see it because there's a lot more thought to what you're doing than a lot of the paintings that I see in other galleries. I look at stuff and it's very surface level. And I've even come so far as I'm a huge John Singer Sargent fan. I love his work, right? Beautiful. But this style of work, and I've come to appreciate it more of the abstract stuff in the sense that it definitely evokes more of a feeling from you than, let's say, a photorealistic painting, where now I kind of look at the photorealism like, I just, it's beautiful. And I can't imagine, you're working 200 hours doing this big face, not you, but these photorealists. Right. And, but it looks like a photograph. So it's not evoking that emotion that I would getting to, from art in your style, where you definitely, maybe the first time you look at it, feel very uncomfortable. And then maybe when you go back and you spent some time with it, like Todd was talking about, where you start to feel different things or start to see different things, which evokes different thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. And I've mentioned this many times, but in that regard, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to set them. So I'm using, for instance, iridescent paints and metallic paints that change with lighting. And so sometimes the highlights change or the midtones shift. And so someone comes in the morning, they come out of their bedroom around the corner, they look at the piece, they see one piece, they look at it before they go to bed at night, they see a totally different piece. They see a different piece in daylight. Now, I know that happens with all paintings, but this is dramatic. And it's now planned. I'm learning how to use that, how to create that change. And with that change comes an emotional shift. Because if you shift the highlights and the midtones on a painting just ever so slightly, the expression changes. And if the expression is changing, going back to the Cubists, if there's a change taking place in some way, what's happening? It's more real, hopefully, to you. And so that's what I want to have happen, that reality. And I've posted this on my website and talked about it. But the best example of that for me is the woman who saw one of my paintings and sent me a long note and said that I understood her and that she wanted to die. And she could tell by looking at the painting. And she said the next morning she came out and looked at this. She was looking at it on her cell phone. And she said the next day she came out and looked at the painting again, and she saw hope in the woman's eyes. And she said that I knew then that I could have hope. You saved my life. Now, that's amazing to me. And as an artist, I only have to do that once. And but I can't tell you how many people, but particularly when I just did 2 pieces with National Institute of Health. And when those get broadcast, or if, a podcast that's really zeroing in on the stigma and survival aspect of it, where it's much shorter, and we're dealing not with the art, but we're talking more about the story behind it. I can't tell you the people that call me up and or they're sending me notes, and they're saying things like, "I'm going to have the courage now to start that intervention with my wife or my son or my daughter," or they'll call up and they'll say, one of my actually I've got 5 paintings that are called Emma, and they'll say, my daughter's name is Emma and she committed suicide, but I want to tell you how important it is that you're doing this. And so that's really driving me. That's driving the whole process. It's a sad state of events, but it's something that I can latch onto and run with.
I love that story of the lady that woke up the next day and found hope. I mean, that, like you said, do that one time and you've changed the world, and you never have to paint again. But then you just continue to do this and touch people. I totally can understand that for sure.
Yeah.
And that note came from somebody halfway across the world in like Syria or something, right?
It was in Syria. Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So it just shows you how much art is universal and what the power of art can do, either by furthering the conversation or the effect that it has on other people.
Right.
I want to talk about another piece here. A lot of your pieces, like you said, have a very limited color palette. That one that we just talked about, that Destiny 24 piece, was kind of the exception to the rule. But one of the favorite pieces that I picked out was this piece entitled Ruth.
Oh, yes.
And in a handful of pieces, you choose to really like draw the eye with this color red that you've incorporated into it. Talk about that in your choice of utilizing red.
Sure. Okay. So very early on, well, let's say 12, 13 years ago, I started, actually, this was right after it was Michael Burnett who told me to start doing big faces. And when I started to do the big faces, I said, well, I think I'm going to spice this up a little bit and splash some big red strokes over it. And red is an interesting color because it can denote violence. It can denote a hot car. It can denote love. And so how can that color do that? Well, I think it has to do with context. But when I spoke at Johns Hopkins, one of the neuroscientists there addressed my use of the color red. And he said that red, he thinks, is an immediate trigger to our brains. We don't think about it. We see red and it's bam. And you respond to that immediately. And then after you respond to the red, which is in a split second, then you start to respond to the rest of the painting and you start to ask questions about the painting. Is this artist defacing his work? why is he putting the red on there? And you get into a bigger discussion on the painting. And then the other things in terms of the style in the painting, and you get to know it more. Well, I got such responses with the red that I kept doing it for a while. And then I said, I've gotten too comfortable with red. So I took about maybe 2 years off now and I didn't use red in my paintings anymore, just to say, can I still elicit a response? I'm experimenting, right? Can I still elicit a response without the red? And so then I started to do just later on, after I had my period where I gave up red, I started to just work it back in. I would maybe have red lips, or I just put a splash of paint across of red. And then I started experimenting with just slashes of other colors, and it didn't work like the red. The red really had an impact. And so I still use it. And in this painting, if you zero in on the eyes, you'll see that the eyes are green. And of course, that's the complementary color to red. And they're probably the same value as the red as well. I'm guessing, but it probably is. I can't tell by the image, and I don't remember what my plan was, but I probably wanted it to be the same value. Those eyes look pretty intense, don't they?
Yeah.
And I think that's the combination of the fact that I've got them in a stare kind of stare, being stare kind of look right at you, but it's that green that's the same value as its complementary color, the red. And I think this painting just burrows a hole in you.
It does. To me, it elicits power. Like, this is a woman that there's some power behind those eyes. There's power emanating from her, and probably somebody I wouldn't want to cross.
Well, if you think about this concept of victims, witnesses, and survivors, she's a survivor. And so I definitely paint some paintings with a slightly elevated chin, and someone is saying, I've been there, I've won the battle, or I've been there and I can help you too. And that's on purpose. So again, I think some of my paintings, you can definitely see victim, witness, or survivor.
I love it how you have a bunch of cool tones in there as well. I mean, it draws your, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but it definitely draws your eye to the face. Yeah. You got this figure, but there's so much going on with this painting. And I misspoke. It's not just called Ruth. It's called Ruth 2. How do you go about naming these pieces? Are these actual...
That's the name of the model.
Okay. So you start with a model.
Yes, I do. And this is Ruth. And this was the second painting I did of Ruth, the second portrait I did of her. And so that's my naming convention. So if it's Destiny 22, that's the 22nd painting, portrait I did of Destiny. And now during COVID, I haven't had a live model. So I've been reverting back to photos that I've used. Okay, so that's part of my process. Everything starts with a real sit down with a real person. I sat down with Ruth, and then I painted her for a couple of hours, drew her more likely for a couple of hours. And then I took a couple of photographs, and then I may either have her come back or I'll just work with those photographs to continue the painting. And during COVID, I've just been going back to either those previous photographs of people, or I've been going back to those early paintings of those people, and then picking up a very early version of a painting and then finishing it from there.
So are these models, are they victims or survivors, or are they just models that you hire? Or
first of all, in almost all cases, not all, but in most cases, they're people that I just met. And there'll be a barista at the local coffee shop, and I'll say, are you interested in posing for me? And so if I've been in there for the last 2 years and they've been a barista, they know me, they know I'm an artist. And a lot of times they'll say yes, or they'll say, I've been meaning to ask you. Sometimes I'll just see someone and I'll ask them, and I'll give them my card and I say, check out my website. So, I'm legit. Yeah. And then others like Ruth, I met in a drawing session. And so she was a model in a drawing session. And then she became one of my regular models after that. And so I have tended through the years to work with the same people multiple times in multiple years. I mean, there's women here that I've painted for 10 years, and we become good friends and become friends with their families. And so it's been a great experience. And to answer your original question, I don't know. I truly don't. Yeah. So I don't search for victims, witnesses, and survivors. I don't paint them saying this person is a victim, a witness, or a survivor. I paint them just as I see them right in front of me.
Thanks for clarifying that. I think it's important to know. And I love the fact that you're working with the same models for a decade, because there's changes in people's faces, and I'm sure you capture those.
Actually, that's one of the interesting things with working with self-portraits, in that I capture change, and I'm and I can't say that I'm overtly trying to capture change, but I know I am. And so I don't shy away from all the wrinkles and spots and things that are on my own face, since I've been painting myself.
What do you look for when you're approaching people to be a model for you? Is there a certain look that they have? Is it something that an interaction that kind of sparks? I think she's interesting, not only from the shape of her face or what have you, but there's something interesting underlying with her.
Sure. Okay, so and there's two ways you figure that out. One is if you're in a drawing session and a person like Ruth is already working there as a model, and you see, can the person hold their pose? Does this person have a look that I'm interested in? Is the person interesting? Because I'm going to be spending a lot of hours with you, and I want to be able to have a good conversation. And so that happens. When I see someone on the street, more often than not, I've encountered them more than once in the coffee shop or whatever. And they've got an interesting look about them. I like them. And so I'll ask them to model. If they're not a good model, and by that I mean they're moving too much, although I don't mind movement. A lot of modeling group, a lot of art groups, if that model moves an inch, a half an inch, or changes their expression, people are going to tell her, well, I don't worry about that because I want you talking while I'm working with you. But still, when I say, okay, stop talking, I'm going to work on your lips now, then they can do that. But after the first session, if the person is on time, if we've had a good discussion, and frequently there may be more than one artist with me, not always, but frequently, and we've had a great time, then I'll ask that person back.
And then my other question for you, William, is why are you drawn to the feminine, to female models as your subject matter?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think when you think about it, I started painting. And when I first started painting, we were living in the Virgin Islands at the time. And another artist friend said, well, if you want to learn to paint, the first thing you got to do, the hardest thing to paint is to paint the human body. And you got to learn to paint the body. And the idea was, if you paint a tree and you get a limb wrong, no one worries about it. If you get a limb wrong on a person, everyone notices it. And so it was a good way to hone your painting skill, your eye-hand coordination. And so I buy that argument. And bodies are hard to paint. Hands are hard to paint. Feet are hard to paint and draw. And so I focused on painting people. Well, 95% of all painters' models are women. And so I use that term loosely, 95%, but I think that's probably pretty close. And so it was just easier to find models. Secondly, when I started to paint a series, it was just easier to have all women in the series. Now, I'm not saying that logic still holds, but it did. And then when I wanted to paint men, I just decided to start painting myself. And I thought that did a couple of things for me. It was convenient because I just look in a mirror, number one. Number two, I was cheap. Number three, I was able to do a whole series of self-portraits, which then opened up a whole new avenue for me. So I'm already thinking about how do I superimpose these? How do I create a video with 20 self-portraits that more for each other. And so I started to think about these kinds of things. So that's just the direction I've gone. And of course, in COVID, it's even more so because I don't have access to models. So that's just kind of the route I've taken, and I'm comfortable with that. It doesn't stop me. But, right now I've got the artist who painted these victims, witnesses, and survivors being shown alongside them. And I kind of like that idea of incorporating myself in my gallery canvas. It just kind of works. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
How much of your, if any, your experience making maps and being involved with map making is incorporated in what you do? Is there any of that from your previous life that you incorporate as far as your artwork is concerned?
Yes and no. And I wasn't doing it consciously, but a reviewer did a piece on one of my early shows down at Space Gallery with the faces. And she looked at it, and she knew also that I was a map maker. And she said, "You have created that." Well, first of all, she said, "Do you know you paint like a printmaker?" So in other words, if I'm doing woodcuts or some kind of a print, and I'm doing layer by layer by layer of color. And you heard me talk earlier about layer by layer by layer by layer and varnishing between each layer. Well, that is kind of similar in terms of the concept of putting down a layer, then another layer, then another layer. So that's exactly how you make maps. So maps are made in layers. So the green is one layer, the red is another layer, the text is another layer, the roads and trails are another layer. And I was kind of doing the same thing and not thinking about it. And I think it's just what naturally came to me. And that's just how I started painting. So just the other day, I posted a piece, and one of my map making friends in Australia responded and said, "You can sure see your map making coming through on this piece." And I thought, "Isn't that interesting?" And he said, "Yeah, I can see the topography you've drawn here." And I thought, "Yeah, you're kind of right." I don't think about it. I don't purposely try to put it in there, but it shows through in what I'm doing.
I know this has evolved over time, but with your painting, how much of it, and you talked about your process, how much of it is intuitive and how much is it intentional?
Yes. Okay. Well, it's certainly a combination. Well, first of all, as an artist, I'm an intuitive artist, right? I'm self-taught. And so when I started working with acrylics, no one taught me how to use it. And so I just played around with it, and some things worked. And then I started working oils into them, and I abandoned that. And I started working charcoal into it and pastels into it. And so I'm always experimenting. So that part of it's intuitive. But there's an intuitive part of it that is the experimentation part of it, of spilling paint or trying out new tools. So if you look at some of my paintings, you'll see definite marks that once you know that I've been using Bounty paper towels, you'll know what Bounty paper towels imprint like on my canvases. And, so things like that, you'll be able to tell what the back of these little kitchen scrubbies look like when they've got the back that's Scotch-Brite. And you'll know I've been using that. And so once you know these things, you'll see them. But those are all learned. I'm not restricted to brushes and palette knives. I paint more with a sponge than I do with a brush. And I do a lot with my, I've got two squeegees. I've got a 4-foot squeegee and I've got a 1-foot silkscreen squeegee. I'm using those all the time. And so just things that I pick up that I see I started using squeegee when I saw a video of Gerhard Richter using a big squeegee across a painting. I thought, isn't that cool? Now, how can I incorporate that? And so, you're obviously looking at other artists. What are they doing? But you're also something just pops in your mind, or you see it laying there and you say, well, what would happen if I use this? And the thing with using your intuition is some things work and some things don't. And the trick is, if they work, learn how to repeat them. If they don't work, forget them and move on to something else. But it's a constant process of trying new processes. And there's hundreds of things out there I could still be. I haven't mixed dirt into my paintings yet. And I was just in a museum, and I was looking at these Dubuffet pieces, and he's got dirt in there, you know, and I thought, oh, is that cool? And just all these things that we can be working with.
Always thinking about what you can incorporate into the next series, it sounds like.
And you know what? It's not that I'm thinking about it. It's that I spot it and then think about it. In other words, you put two and two together. Isn't that right? So I get ideas. You get ideas from musicians. You get ideas. You know, someone mentions something. I was at a book fair, and the author who was speaking was talking about the difficulty he was having with blending fiction with nonfiction. But that's what he wanted to do in his work. And I thought, whoa, isn't that like blending abstraction with realism? It's the same idea. And so all of a sudden, I'm on a big push to be able to do that. And maybe that was the source of that Destiny 24 that you put up, because there's parts of it that feel real. Then there's all that abstraction going on. And, so how do you blend those things? And interestingly enough, I've been revisiting this notion of that Destiny 24 that you put up, because I'm saying, how can I make this have a greater emotional impact? So when I did that, I was thinking more of Cubism in the process of creating a Cubist painting. But more importantly, if I go back to what my mission is, how do I make that a piece that not only people are interested in looking at, but people respond to? And so then that's the part that I have to pull into that.
That's the intention, right?
Yes, exactly. And so that's why I'm revisiting these.
I think it's so intriguing. And you're not the first artist that we've talked to where they've gone back and repurposed or reconstructed earlier work or incorporated it into newer work. But you're doing it in a totally different way than anybody else that we've talked to, for sure. And definitely thinking outside the box. I mean, that's what artists do anyway. They're always thinking outside the box. But I love where your mind goes and the thought behind these pieces. I want to talk about another piece here. And you mentioned the name Emma before.
Yes.
Talk about this, Emma 2.
Sure. Okay, so Emma's the code name for my sister. And so I've got 5 Emma paintings. I would say when it's seen in person, this painting has a greater reaction than any other painting I show. And just look at it. It's black lines, 2 eyes. There's a faint hand. You can see the wrist coming up, and you can start to see a little finger over the word Emma. And can you blow that up at all? And look at the words. Well, the words, and they're scribbled on there. It says, Emma, I promise to paint your portrait if you promise to go to rehab. And so that's the promise I made my sister. And she went to rehab. and that was after a weekend of trying to accomplish something in terms of getting the proper care for her. And she went into rehab after I painted a portrait of her. This isn't the portrait that I painted of her, but this is what I did later. And those are the words. I promise to paint your portrait if you promise to go to rehab. And this painting, I had a show down at the University of Art and Science of Oklahoma. And this was at the end of the museum space. And people would walk in and they would just make a beeline right to this painting. And everybody was coming back and saying, this is the most effective painting. And so effective is the operative term here, right? So in other words, if I, as an artist, if my mission is to cause people to do something, to take an action, then in fact, it's the most effective painting that, in my mind, is the best painting. And this was an effective painting at that show. And I think it still is. So I just love that with these black marks that tell you that it's a face. You know, I've had people look at this painting and say, I suffer from depression, and this says it all to me. You know, when someone has that reaction, then I've done my job as an artist.
It's a powerful piece. Addiction is a complicated thing. And I think that's where it's amazing to me that we don't have more conversations about it. And especially during the pandemic, when a lot of statistics have been thrown out. I mean, we have a opioid epidemic in this country right now, and especially in certain parts of the country for sure. I know it's huge in my home state of Ohio, but yet we turn a blind eye to it. And people don't think about what people are going through that are suffering. It could be physical. It could be a depression thing. It could be a little bit of everything: depression, physical pain, mental anguish, whatever's going on with that particular person. And yet there is this stigma. What was going on with your sister that made her go down this path?
Well, I'm honestly not privy to a lot of it. I was there. I can only imagine. But I think, she was an early adopter of drugs and alcohol as a teen. And, once that started, things started on a path. And, wonderful husband, wonderful kids, tough life. And the stigma of addiction, I saw the stigma in the medical care she was getting. I saw the stigma as our family reacted to her, me included. And then so here's what really set it off then. She had 2 failed back surgeries. And what did they give her? Opioids. And when the pain got worse, more opioids. And so that's what ruled her life. Opioids rule your life. And if you go back in time, if you go back 10 years, 20 years, and you say, well, this medication, just stop it, but people couldn't. And so they looked for other sources of opioids or alcohol, and things just spiral out of control. And then if that person, it's the rare person that solves it on their own. And you've got to have help, but you got to have understanding, because if your family doesn't understand you, then you go into a depression spiral and it gets worse. And if you don't get the proper help, and you just don't go in once to a treatment center, and you just don't go in twice, and you just go in 3 times. I think people go in many times until they kick it. That's not easy to do. And so a supportive family is so important. My parents both went to a class, to learn about addiction. I did this, and then we talked about how to do an intervention, which then failed. But you try again, and you try again, and you try again, and you have to be there for that person, even though it's hard, and it is hard. So when the person calls you up at 6 p.m, just as you're set to go out to dinner, and they're drunk, and you don't want to take that phone call, but you have to. And the stigma, as we get rid of the stigma, and the stigma exists in the medical profession. They in her case, she wasn't treated seriously. She was just treated as an embarrassment by her doctor, and that doesn't work. You got to have understanding, even though the person who's addicted does things and conducts their life in a way that is very unpleasant for you. But you've got to understand that it's not them, it's the drugs, and there is treatment out there, and not just going into a treatment center, but there's now drugs coming out that can help, and there's medical professionals that know the right thing to do, and it's you can't snap your fingers and make it go away after going to a 3-month session, but it can be beat. And if you don't beat it, you die. And that's tragic. So what's happening now? And so there are so many organizations out there working on destigmatizing now. And that's so critical to this. And I think it's like, okay, so to beat AIDS, and that's not saying we beat it, but it's certainly more under control than what it was in the 1980s. There was such a stigma attached to it. Well, it took people talking about it. And it took artists and writers and playwrights and musicians and our government representatives and all of these people to start talking about it, having the conversation so that people are comfortable with the conversation. And when you're comfortable with the conversation, you can start to destigmatize it. And that's what it's going to take. And that's what I want to be a part of. And I hopefully want to be able to influence other artists and writers and all the people I rattled off to also maybe be part of this, to at least have the discussion with others and to start to beat the stigma.
It's a really complicated subject. And from the beginning of time, people have been using substances to escape or alter their minds in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. And I don't know how it is in other countries, to be honest with you, but at least in America, it seems like we have this huge, long history of this, right? I mean, we had prohibition, at the early part of the 20th century because alcohol was such a huge problem, and it still is today. Yes. Alcohol is generally accepted. People use it every day. Some people don't have a problem just having one or two drinks, but there's plenty of people that still drink to excess, right?
Right.
Yeah. Pick your poison, whether it's meth or cocaine or pills, heroin. I mean, it's our whole culture revolves around it, really.
Well, synthetic opioids changed the game dramatically, and there's always been a problem, but the ease of access to them and the number of people that became addicted to them is just phenomenal. And what's happened now is it's reached into, it's not just, gee, there's Uncle Charlie who's a drunk, he's got a red nose. Now it's your daughter and your daughter-in-law and your husband and your next door neighbor. Everybody is being touched by this. And they're touched not just as a person who's suffering from the use, but also the people that are living with that people and are trying to solve the problem. The victims, the witnesses, and then the survivors.
And then you throw in something like genetics that might come into play, right?
Sure.
The science of it.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole money thing, right? Because this is big money. Like the drug companies are making a huge amount of money off these people that are addicted to these drugs. And at the same time, the medical profession says, here, have a pill. I don't want to really deal with what's really truly going on. Here's a quick fix for you, which is, I think, what a lot of our culture revolves around too. Here, quick fix. I don't want to really deal or delve
right.
too deep into this problem.
And I think that is changing. And I was on a panel a couple months ago with a couple of people from Kaiser Permanente, and they were talking about that there's still a need for pain management, and there's still a need for opioids. The trick is to properly manage that use and to understand and be able to offer treatment and counseling to people for alternative methods of pain relief. And so while, right after your surgery, this is what you need, but maybe 2 days later, you're using some alternative that they've helped you with. And so that's happening in the medical profession. And I think that's really super.
I mean, it's a field of itself too. Pain management in the medical field is this field of itself. So
yeah, exactly. And I'm sure it's growing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you're having these discussions. And I think it's really, I love what you're doing as far as furthering the conversation and, doing that job that, not all artists have to further the conversation, but that you're picking up the torch and running with it and making sure people are aware and bringing awareness. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you.
I want to talk about another piece here.
Mm-hmm.
I want to delve into your self-portraits.
Yep.
Which is, I always think it's fascinating for whatever reason. I've never really been one to do self-portraits. I know other photographers that have and other artists, but I love that exploration. And you made me start thinking about it a little bit as far as exploring the self. I love this. This is entitled Willie 6.
Yeah.
And this has a little bit more color than some of your other work again. And one fascinating element to this, and we kind of touched a little bit on that previous piece, Emma, but at what point did you decide to incorporate hands into these large pieces, these large faces?
Yep. And that's really easy. First of all, hands are hard. And there's this funny thing that goes on with the painting. If you draw a really good hand, you're reluctant to change the painting because you don't want to wreck the hand. So I like to say that the worst thing you can do is draw a good hand. But what I did is I started looking for another creative avenue. So I was saying, okay, so now I'm getting a little bored by just doing the paintings in the exact same arrangement on the canvas. What else can I incorporate? Well, hands are an obvious one. And of course, hands are expressive, right? I started to play with hands. And because I'm doing these abstracted faces, I didn't want to be doing real hands. I wanted to do something that felt like a hand, had hand expression to it, and fit with the rest of the painting. And so that's what I've been doing. Now, there's some people that I can look to who do that already in art. And I certainly quickly pulled out my books on Shilin and Kukushka. And there's a South American artist, Gaia Samin. And I was loving what they were doing with their hands. And so I was saying, I don't necessarily want to copy verbatim from another artist, but can I learn from another artist? And can I try out some of what they do in my paintings? And so I've pretty much focused on that kind of a approach to the hands. And I'm doing all kinds of, if you look at some of these, like how I created the knuckles, well, that's my kind of take on doing that. But, you can certainly see some Sheila and some Gaia Samin in there. And not frequently, but occasionally someone will say, looks like you've been studying from the master, Gaia Samin. And I go, yes, indeed. He's a favorite of mine. And so, I'm just looking, and the hands are typically oversized as well. And when I put a hand on a painting that's a woman, frequently the hand is my hand. So I'll do the painting and I'll look at it and I say, I've got this big space over to the left. Could use something in there. Why don't I put a hand in there? So I go over to the mirror and I look at my own hand, or I'll turn my hand back and forth. I'll take a picture of my hand. And then I'll paint my hand in there, at least for the basic outline.
I love it. You have very expressive hands, by the way.
Yeah, well, thanks.
I'm always interested in people's hands too. I mean, it's one of the things that when I'm talking with a person, I'm always kind of, and I don't know if you do this as somebody that does the kind of work that you do, but do you really study people, really study like their body language and how they hold themselves, how they verbalize things? Do you do that when you're talking with a peer?
Yes. And you probably do it as a photographer, but I'll notice their ears. I may notice something on their lips. I'll maybe notice how a clavicle looks. And so I note these. I mean, I really don't even think about it when I'm looking at them, but I find myself staring at people. And, and all of a sudden they'll snap around and look at me and I go, oh, sorry.
I do the same thing. I'm always staring at people.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing it to say this person's a curiosity or aren't they weird or boy, that's a lovely looking person or, something like that. But what I do is I'm looking at some feature.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. What intrigues you about that person?
Yeah, exactly.
Seeing somebody that's really attractive, right? And they look attractive when they're just sitting there or standing there or what have you, but then how they carry themselves, and it could be totally different, right?
Sure.
And I don't know if you've experienced that, but yeah, it's like you're like, wow, that's so interesting. Like when I was just sitting there with them, they seem very attractive, but the way that they carry themselves, you might sense like a lack of confidence, or there might be a confidence that, you're like, wow, they really have a sense of themselves. And all those little nuances always intrigue me. And I definitely feel like you capture that in these paintings that you do of these people.
And I feel like I do it the other way. I look at somebody who's maybe average looking or not attractive. And I always like looking for something that I find attractive in them, whether it's their eyes, the shape of their nose, the ears. I can usually find something that I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I like that. So,
and of course, attraction is so much more than just the way they look, which you're leading to, and you just go, this person is a super person. It's just too bad they got these massive ears. I'm joking. I'm sure people say that about me all the time. You see the nose on that guy? Have you seen his bald head? But no, everyone is a whole person.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Another one of these self-portraits that I really love is this one. And this is Willie 7.
Yeah.
A lot more stuff going on as far as like little details and very different from your other self-portraits. Talk about this one a little bit.
Sure. Okay, so there's a couple things here that if you look at my self-portraits and if you just zero in on the eyes, you'll see the eyes are always done the same way. You know, I've got the same lines in my eyes, the way my eyes are shaped. And that really makes it like me. But this painting started out with a lot of spilling paint, and I just went with it. So you look at the forehead, you see those two lines coming down across the forehead.
Uh-huh.
That was a paint drip that went off that direction, and I just ran with it. And of course, I've built up the sides of it so that it's a straight line. But I saw that straight line, and I said, "Oh, that's kind of cool." The nose has got that funny little hook in it. Well, that was also, originally a paint spot that I said, "Oh, that's kind of cool. I think I'll run with that line." So then I'm looking at the lines and understand. Remember when I started talking about my iPad and I started out just doing lines? I love lines. And so lines become a real major factor in my paintings, whether it's more realistic or not. So just look at the way that sweep of the nose off to the side, or just look at the lines that are going around on the fingers. And so I'm constantly looking at lines, or you'll see, just look at that slight little line on the forehead, on the brow, just that little line. So you start to look at my other paintings, you'll start to see that line all the time. And so I'm playing with lines and shapes with this one. And this is kind of cubist, I guess. And, I'm still kind of got that same kind of style finger and hands. And the other thing I like to do is there's no way that you can put your little finger in that position, And so I have fun doing that. And so some people will say to me, they'll say, "Well, that's really unrealistic. I mean, look at the way you did that finger. Fingers don't go that way." And I go, "Yeah, that's right." But that's just what I'm doing. Is I'm making this finger look kind of mashed up. Now, it turns out my own hands, I've got so many broken bones and busted knuckles in my right hand. It kind of starts to look like that. But, I do that and I like that. I like the feel that gives me. It tells you something about me in that portrait, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad you spoke to that because like I said, I look at people's hands all the time and I think they're interesting. They're interesting appendages. They're interesting parts of the body. And I think about, older people's hands and how sometimes when they get arthritic, they do start to turn and twist, and then, it takes on a whole different, you could read into a bunch of different things with how you decided to incorporate that hand, whether it's realistic or not. Yeah. I always think of Keith Richards' hands. If you've ever seen that guy's hand.
I know.
Oh my God.
I know.
I want to photograph his hands so badly because he just, they're just so interesting. The shapes of them.
Yeah.
I want to ask him, hey, do your hands hurt when you play for 3 hours on a concert? Do your hands hurt at the end of the day?
Yeah,
I can't imagine.
Yes. Yeah. So actually on this piece now, as I'm looking at this again, so look at the fun I'm having with shapes. So I've got all those obvious shapes that looks like pieces of my face are falling off to the side. But then, of course, the shape of the nose, it's got that odd shape. And then I'm incorporating these white lines around all these funny little squares, which I repeat on the fingernails. And then there's a whole series of shapes that feel like a puzzle in the thumb. And so there's just all these little shapes, but yet I think you come back to okay. So one of the things I always try to do is I give you a couple things that somehow feel real. It could be an ear, it could be lips, a nose. More often than not, it's the eyes. And if I give you something on the canvas that feels real, I think you want to then complete the painting and make it real in the terms that we talked about much earlier about how do I try to entice you to create and finish the painting and the narrative. And I think something on the painting has to have a sense of reality to it to help you along that task that I give you.
That's human nature. We want to create the narrative or finish, plug up the holes and then look for patterns. So that's just normal for us. Yeah. Right.
And that's built into us. The brain abhors a vacuum. And so if I create something ambiguous with some reality attached to it, you want to finish the puzzle.
Yeah.
With all your pieces, I always feel like the foundation, like you were talking about, is really the eyes. Like that's what always is consistent, right? In your work.
Yes. And that gets back to that point of me giving you something. Well, okay. So, all right. So let's go back to eyes a minute. We're probably hardwired to go immediately to eyes when we see them. So that's what a baby does. Everybody says, oh, look, the baby's looking at me. Well, the baby's probably hardwired for that, to go directly to the eyes. And so once I have you engaged with the eyes, then I can start to do other things on that canvas. And that's when I create the puzzle for you to complete. So I engage you with the eyes, and then I give you cues that you can then put back in place and complete the image in your own mind. And to me, I think that's how it works. I engage you with the eyes. I then give you maybe a few other realistic cues, but more often than not, I give you a puzzle to complete, both for the narrative and for the painting itself.
Yeah.
I know that you go back and you've been revisiting some of these pieces in different ways, especially with the hybrid work. How do you decide when a piece is done?
Oh, okay. So I think there are some pieces, maybe one, that I think is done. And if you look up my website, I think it's called Lane 5. And I think that painting's done. But I can tell you that I worked on that painting for 10 years. And actually that's her right there with me standing next to on the front there.
Okay.
So if you find that painting in there, which you will, you can enlarge it. And I think there you go. I think that painting's probably done. That is the very first 7-foot painting I did. And when you get back from it, it looks like a photograph. When you get 20 feet back from it, then you get up close and you see all the things I'm doing with the metallic paint and my dots and all of those things. I always tell people that if you own one of my paintings, and if I'm on your doorstep with a brush in my hand, don't let me in.
We've actually had somebody else say something very similar to that. They always want to go and fix it.
Yeah, that's right. And so I'll get an unsold painting back from a show, and I'm working on it. And there's a reason for that. One is I've learned new things, right? In the time since I, quote, finished that painting. And the other thing is my idea of a perfect painting changes in my mind. So I have a different mind's eye image of that painting. And so I'll want to take that in that direction. So it's my own perfect mental image, which is better than the painting itself, which I try to get to. And I'll never reach that goal of my perfect mental image because it keeps changing.
That's a true artist right there.
Yeah. I love that.
You talked about how you lay out the faces.
Yeah.
Is there any science behind that? I know that there's science how people perceive other people, what they consider beautiful as far as the spacing of the eyes. Is that something you're incorporating?
No.
Or you okay?
Not at all. Here's what I do. So imagine that lane in front of you there. Well, you can see she's an 80 by 60 inch canvas in the title. And so there's this big canvas in front of me. I go out and I put a cross or an X right where those two are. Well, no, here's what I do first. I get my yardstick and I measure down 22 inches and I draw a line across the painting. And then I measure down another maybe 16 inches and I draw another line. And then I measure another 16 in another line, maybe another 16 or so in another line. What I've just given you is the location for the eyes the bottom of the nose, the lips, and the chin. And then I'll draw a line on the width of her face. And then, so I'll come in maybe, I don't know, 15 inches from the side of the canvas. And then I'll start pouring paint. Now that paint may take a different direction. And the paint that's getting to look like what I really want to turn into the eye might be different than where I put that X. It might be lower, it might be higher, and it might be more off to the side. Now, I don't want the painting to look ridiculous, but I will watch where that paint is flowing, and I'll adjust the face accordingly. And you can see that. Actually, if you want to pull up another painting, if you go back to that selection that you were just in, so if you just X her out, let's see. Oh, this one. Okay, so go down to 1, 2, 3, 4 paintings, and there's okay. Go to right there. That one.
This one right here.
Yeah.
This is one of my other favorite ones that I wanted to talk about. I didn't think we were going to get to it, so that's interesting.
So look where the eyes are, where the nose is, and where the lips are. They're all out of whack. And so I just followed where the paint went from my initial marks, and I went with it. And I went with it because I know that that's very much in that Cubist notion that I was talking about earlier. So if you looked at a person really quick, would that be the image you'd have? You'd have the lips over to the side a little bit, and the nose comes along, then maybe that eye drops off. So, that's all the experimentation that's starting to come through in a painting like this.
And this piece that we're looking at, for people that are listening, it's called Heather 1. It's another really stunning, just exquisite piece.
I love the use of purple in that too. I love that eye.
Yeah, I do too. And then see, I'm dealing with the shapes on the bottom, and then you look at the one eye with the paint dripping off and coming off her hair. That's gold paint. That's gold acrylic, metallic paint. And then I've used that on her cheek and down to her chin on that same side. And when the lighting changes on this painting changes dramatically.
Wow.
And then on the other side, I worked in a bunch of silver paint. So, really fun. And then you can see where I just kind of threw paint. You can see the way it dripped. And then I put in some real structure, didn't I, with her body and her neck.
Yeah, I love the lines in this particular piece. How much do you think ego plays into creating extraordinary work?
Well, first of all, I would say I'm my harshest critic. Okay, when I was first starting out, when someone say that painting's really lousy, or I don't like it, or why did you do this? I imagine I was affected by it, but I'm not anymore. I have enough confidence in what I'm doing that I go with it. So I did a piece the other day, and I had I put a soundtrack to it, and it was a series of self-portraits. And then I had this sound, it was a laugh track.
Yeah.
And everyone came back to me, invariably, everyone hates the laugh track. And I thought that's all the more reason for me to pursue it and to think more about soundtracks. And it may not be a laugh track like that. But if I can do something that my artist friends say they don't like, then maybe I'm on the road to finding something new and different and exciting. Now, that doesn't mean that I'll stick with that laugh track. But I was not hurt by that in the least. I am confident in what I'm doing. Now, does that make it good work or great work or a masterpiece? No. But is it good in my mind that I'm headed in the right direction? Yes. Will I change my direction? Well, I already know I will, because my mental image will change. Yes. But I'm confident in the process that I'm using.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did want to talk about that.
Yes.
And I watched that twice yesterday, and I got to say, it made me feel, and I don't know, I got to revisit again. I loved what you did with it. And at the same time, I'm with your friends. I hated it. I'm like, why? This makes me feel really uncomfortable. After a while, I'm like, holy crap. Like, it almost gives me the shivers talking about it right now, like goosebumps. But yeah, it made me feel really uncomfortable. So I'm like, why does this? I didn't have enough time after watching it twice. I'm like, this is so interesting, but it makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable. And I haven't figured out why that is. And then at the end, you have all this applause, right?
Yeah.
which I thought was a really, and I was just like, I wonder what's going through his head. Why did you choose to put this laugh track on there? I mean, I had different ideas, but at the same time, like I said, I'm curious.
Okay. Well, and do you remember the last image on there? It was a straight line.
I'd have to go back and look at it again. Yeah.
And what does a straight line signify? If you're in the hospital and the monitor goes straight line.
Oh, okay.
Now think about it differently. So first of all, I'm obviously experimenting, right?
Yeah.
Okay, when I experiment, I throw it right out there. I throw it out there to the 300,000 people who are following me on Facebook. And I had a lot of people comment that just say, oh, we really like the visual part of it, but the soundtrack, oh. Well, that if that made everyone uncomfortable. So then I thought, that's the artist's death. That's what that's about. And so now I'm not suicidal by any stretch or anything, but I thought about, well, what would it feel like to end my life? And not by my own hand, but of that. And would I feel good about my life? Would I have a good laugh about it? Would at the end of it, would people applaud? Would they applaud because I was gone? And I wanted to put in a whole new level of thinking in that piece. And I'm trying to think, how can I do that with the soundtrack, with the laughter? And the other thing was, it was really inconsistent, wasn't it? And so I thought, well, I guess that's a good thing for people to think about. So the very fact that you spent some time thinking about it tells me, well, maybe I accomplished something there.
I think you did. And I almost wish we hadn't talked about it now, because I wish I could have revisited it and kind of come to that same kind of conclusion about what you laid out. I definitely got the sense, and I appreciated the laughter, and then it keeps on going on and it keeps on going on. You're like, is it going to stop? It's showing your various self-portraits. And I love the fact that I'm like, what is he trying to say here? Is this something that I could do as an artist? Like, I take what I do very seriously. I don't take myself very seriously. So if people find me funny for whatever, because I have my little quirks, that doesn't bother me. I don't take myself seriously in that aspect. But and maybe I'm lying to myself, but I just thought it was an interesting experiment, for lack of a better word. And obviously you did too, from the feedback that you got.
Mm-hmm. And actually, next time you look at it, look at the sequence of portraits that comes up sometimes. And you can read a lot into that as well. And of course, on one hand, I keep saying, I don't want the painting to be about me. I want it to be about you. But you think about how you feel when you see that sequence coming up.
Yeah, it made me think about me.
Yeah.
And for people that want to check that out, go to the new media section of the artwork tab. Scroll all the way down to the bottom. There's a couple videos there, both of which are both really good. The chapter 23 that you entitled, that's a great video. But yeah, the self-portrait is down there at the bottom, and see what you think. One of the things that I love about what you do on social media and is that you deep dive into what you're thinking about that day or that piece or what you've been studying. And I love the fact that you're willing to share that and be vulnerable. And that's one of the things we talk about all the time. I mean, not only through your art, but also through your thoughts. And a lot of artists don't do that, but I love that you do that and that you share this to all your followers. Do you ever feel like you need to self-edit? Do you ever self-edit?
Oh, sure. I do, of course, all the time. But I appreciate it when someone does self-edit. And like in the case of the laugh track, I have a choice to agree or disagree, but I do self-edit. And he I'm sure won't remember this, but Michael Burnett said to me one time, I was showing him some new paintings, and he said, I think you need to do some more self-editing. And I thought, oh, okay. And what that said to me is, it got me thinking on this whole vein of, your show is only as good as your worst piece in it. And so, what you put out there, you want to be your best work. at least in your own mind, your best work. And so you just don't want to put a painting out there that you need one more painting so you'll fill in the space. You don't want to do that. And I'm not saying you can always avoid doing that, but you've got to self-edit and look at your work. Your notion of self-editing changes as you mature as an artist. And what was good 10 years ago, you don't see as good today. Or you may look at something from 10 years ago and say, you know what, I was really onto something then and I lost it. And I need to get back to that space. And so self-editing is really reviewing your body of work, combining it with what you've learned and then taking the next step forward. How do you recombine those things? Because it's amazing how many things you forget that you used to do good and do well. And for whatever reason, you stop doing it that way. And so you start reincorporating some of those things. And that's all through the self-editing process. And also back to putting things out there and talking about them. That's my way of thinking things through. I find I can think of something, but when I really put it down on paper or put it on the web, I've thought it through more so. And then I also self-edit myself. And I say, do I still believe that? Do I still believe it's wrong to put too much color in? Do I still believe I have to start with the eyes? Do I still believe that red is a trigger? Well, those are kind of easy ones, but there's other ones that I say, I've been telling people this is the way I think. Do I really think that way? Is that still valid? And so that's what putting it down does. It causes you to do that.
I think more people should do that. I think we have a society that doesn't self-edit, that doesn't evaluate themselves and whether it's in their career or personal life or whatever. I think we have a society of people that just go on and not think twice about what they do and what they are.
These faces that you paint, they're not supposed to necessarily be literal, right? You're trying to capture the essence of that person. Is that what I've heard you say?
Yes. And I do that a lot where so sometimes I'll paint a painting and so that lane 5 you had up, if you saw a lane on the street, you'd immediately knew who I painted. Okay. Looks just like her. So I think that there's times when I say, just as a challenge, I'm going to try to make this really look like the person. Then other times I say, I don't care. But if I maybe have an essence of them, that's great. Or if it even goes in a different direction, but I like the painting and I like the sense I'm getting from it, then I'll run with that too. So, it can go in multiple directions once I get going.
Do your subjects ever look at these paintings that you've made of them and tell you, wow, you captured something, or other people that know these people?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Or they'll say, you captured exactly how I felt on that day. And I think that's good. And how does that happen? I don't say, this person really looks distressed or this person really looks happy, and I'll paint them that way. No, you just, as you're painting them, you capture it and they sense that.
That's really the highest compliment, isn't it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, yes, exactly. You captured me. Yeah. Or when you're looking at it, you're not the model for it. You look at it and you create the narrative and you see yourself in that painting. You say, I'm the addict, or I'm a witness and I'm going to do this, or, and that's the real reality. Mark Rothko, this is getting back to realistic paintings. Mark Rothko used to say, I can't remember the exact words, but in essence, he said he was a realist. All his paintings were real. I mean, they were about reality. And of course, I was just in the Rothko room at the National Gallery last week, and I was thinking about that. And you say, what was he really saying? Well, what he's saying is that I'm creating a mood, and I'm creating an environment that I want you to enter. And inside that environment, you'll either do some self-reflection or you'll have a sense of something that is very real. So I am a realist painter. And I feel exactly the same way. That if I can paint a painting that doesn't exactly look like a person, their eyes are out of whack and the nose is in a funny position, but you sense something about that, and you have a strong emotional reaction, then I've painted something you as the viewer have painted your own image that's very real. And that's what I'm trying to do.
You're giving people the pieces of the puzzle and letting them figure it out.
Exactly. Yep.
Do you have any things going on in the very near future in 2022 as far as shows or exhibitions that we should be aware of?
No, in fact, I was just back in Colorado a couple of weeks ago and took down 3 shows. So I had the show at CU, the show at Foothills Art Center, and I had 2 pieces at the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. And I collected all those works and brought them back, and I don't have anything right now. And so my largest gallery is actually in Atlanta, and it's the Bill Lowe Gallery, and they probably have about 20 pieces. I still have pieces down at Michael Burnett. I say still, I have pieces at Michael Burnett's gallery, but I don't have anything planned right now. And right now, my big focus is online. And so finding my work online, and then the whole world of NFTs is really keep me busy. And I want to make a splash with that. And I think that'll be a way to really see my work.
I'm really interested to see where that goes. And
me too.
we'd love to have you on again sometime in the future and talk about where this work is going and what you've been up to. And I can't wait to see your work in person. So I look forward to that. I'd love to do a studio visit with you sometime when you're in Colorado.
When I'm back there and we don't have COVID, you're more than welcome. We'll talk about that.
All right. Great. That sounds good. William, thank you so much for spending the last few hours with us. It's been an absolute joy. I love the way your mind works. And this is one of the beautiful things about doing a podcast is that we get to have these wonderful conversations each week with somebody that we didn't know previous. And now I feel like I made a new friend, as Wes would always say, that we got to have this, we had this connection and we got to talk about your work. So thank you so much. That means the world. Anybody that's willing to engage with us for a few hours, I always appreciate the fact that they're willing to spend that time away from their family, away from their work. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It was really fun.
The one thing I want to say is I think you provided a lot of information today that should be mandatory listening to art students, because we haven't really talked to anybody that thinks this in depth about what they're doing and why they're doing it and the mission around it. And I think that's important because you're a perfect example of how people can change society with their artwork, you know? So I appreciate the fact that you've done that. And thank you for coming on and explaining that and talking about your mission.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Again, check out William's website. It's williamstoehrart.com. And you can find him on Instagram at WLStoehr. I'll have all the information in this week's episode notes. And for the Tenet Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.